Good evening and welcome to our sixth of our 7-session series on global engagement based on the book Questing by the Reverend Dr. Titus Pressler and the Reverend Dr. Grace Burton. And today we are truly blessed to have with us Martha Gardner from the Diocese of Massachusetts. She is heavily involved in all kinds of global mission stuff, so I'm not going to go through that long list of things, but we are really privileged to have you here today, Martha. Before we begin, just a very quick brief on the use of this software. It does not work on your cell phone or your tablet. Unfortunately, it works on a desktop or a laptop using Google Chrome browser or the latest Microsoft Edge browser. So those two browsers work. Safari, unfortunately, doesn't work, and other browsers do not work. So please make note of that. You will be able to see this session on your cell phone, but you will not be able to participate. And the idea really is for you to be able to participate. So if you can use one of those forums, that would be awesome. You can see the list of attendees. You can talk to people, chat with them by clicking on the three dots on the side of their name, and just click on direct message, and you can have a chat conversation with people. You can also have a chat conversation with everyone present by clicking on the chat icon in the ribbon on your right hand side, most likely, or it may be down below. When we are having a session like this, you can raise your hand, and when you do, I can bring you up to the stage, and you can be seen here, and you can ask your question there, and or have a conversation with us, or share what you have to share from this stage. You can ask questions, type in questions by clicking on the questions button, and others can see what you have asked, and they can upvote it so that the speaker may know which ones to take first. Today, we were supposed to have Archbishop Josiah Furon. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us today. And I found myself in that situation where God says, go, you go. So I'm living deeply into what we will be doing today, and I'll be starting us off with some stories. So right now, I'm going to invite our companions in mission, friend Bill Schroll, to start us off with a prayer.
Okay, this is prayer for the mission of the church, and let us pray. Almighty God, you sent your Son Jesus Christ to reconcile the world to yourself. We praise and bless you for those whom you have sent in the power of the Spirit to preach the gospel to all nations. We thank you that in all parts of the earth, a community of love has been gathered together by their prayers and labors, and that in every place your servants call upon your name. Lord, as we call upon your name, send us out that we may go. For the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bill. So our topic for today is go. And Before I go into that topic, the structure today, Martha and I talked about it, and we think that it would be really beneficial if we can hear from you, if we can hear from you, and not only about tonight, but also you have been attending all these sessions. What have you gained from it? How has it been for you? And we would really like to have a conversation about that. So what we're doing today is that I'll do a 15-minute session, and then instead of having 20 minutes at the tables, we will still have table discussions. Instead of doing 20 minutes there, we are going to actually do 10 minutes. And then we'll have another 15 minutes and then another 10 minutes. And that way we get 20 minutes plus the 10 minutes we have at the end. And so we have about half an hour of coming together and sharing our thoughts with everybody, and not just on our smaller groups. However, smaller groups are really important as well, because that's where you get the opportunity to really engage with 2 or 3 people. So when we take a break from this live session and go to our tables, I encourage you to find a table where you may not know someone before. And so please take some time to find that table and engage in those conversations there for those questions. So now, I'm going to share today 3 stories of going. My first story is when I was very young, and some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, but I grew up in a clergy family. My dad was served as a bishop for a number of years in a very rural diocese in Pakistan, and with having grown in that family, it offered me the possibility to meet all kinds of people, people from the rural areas who were leaders in those communities, but also people from the world over who were leaders in their communities in different contexts. The story today is of a bishop in Pakistan from the Diocese of Hyderabad. Now, if you're not familiar with Pakistan, Pakistan was part of Greater India, and when in 1947 there was a partition, and the areas where there was Muslim majority ended up becoming Pakistan, and that's quite an interesting thing because it has never happened before or since that a single country had another country in between. So there was West Pakistan, and then there was this, which turned out to be the enemy country for Pakistan, India, and then there was this East Pakistan, which later in 1970 turned into Bangladesh. So now we know it as Bangladesh. So the borders of Pakistan, Pakistan borders India, it borders Afghanistan, that you probably are familiar with and have heard most about, but it also borders China, and it borders Iran. And all these borders are extremely porous. And in some cases, it's not even known where the border actually is. The border between, part of the border between Pakistan and India is a desert. And the people living in that desert actually really don't know that there are these 2 different countries, because it's a desert. No one there goes there except the people who are of the desert, and they move freely between these 2 countries, and for them there is no difference. It's actually very similar with Afghanistan. People move between Pakistan and Afghanistan as if there was no border. And so the Bishop of Hyderabad uh, started, and he was someone who was really interested in evangelism. So he had a keen interest in this desert area because it bordered his diocese. And so he started taking you know interest in going into the desert and engaging with people who were just living in tents most of the time, because they were nomadic people. They would just go from one place to another. um, and he started establishing what you would call a church plant, sending his pastors there and evangelists, and really engaging with those communities. And so these communities were essentially Hindu. Uh, and Hindus, the cause for Pakistan was that Muslims and Hindus decided they really couldn't live together. So there was a Muslim majority area that turned into Pakistan. So Hindus are a minority in Pakistan, wherever they are in the cities, mostly in Karachi. But wherever they are not treated well. Christians are also a minority, but still at that time, it's no longer true, but at that time, Christians still were treated slightly better than Hindus. So Hindus were interested in maybe changing the way they were viewed. And so that's the sort of the sociological force that was at play. And this bishop started working with these communities. They heard the gospel, and after hearing the gospel, some of these communities wanted to be baptized. And after a while, they would receive their baptism. And then a very interesting problem um, came around. And that problem was, how are we going to do our wedding ceremonies? Because Christians in Pakistan and India had acquired the Western cultural ceremony of a wedding. And here were these nomadic people who wanted to have Christ, but were not really sure how that would translate into their culture. So there were some really interesting conversations that happened between the community and the people working there. And this was the story that the bishop told us. In Hindu wedding, you go around a fire as you are getting married. So if you have seen any of the Indian movies, you would see the wedding scene is the couple is actually tied together, and they walk around this fire while a Hindu priest is reciting the scriptures, their Hindu scriptures. And so the bishop said, you know what? Fire is a symbol of the Holy Spirit. In Hindu wedding, you take 7 rounds around the fire. And he said, 7 is a Christian number too. And he said, it would be wonderful if a Christian priest can, chant scriptures, Christian scriptures, while you do that. So the wedding looked exactly what people were used to, and all the symbols were in some ways translated into their symbolism in Christian faith. I thought that was a very interesting approach that the bishop took in taking the gospel, being in that context, respecting their culture, and yet somehow translating that for these people. My second story is from when I was in Akron, Ohio. We decided to do a community meal. And as a Pakistani coming into the US, I could never and still don't really understand people's hesitation in sharing the gospel in this culture. Um, and so we were organizing this community meal, and we did a lot of research, and it was all a step in faith because we didn't know how much it was going to cost and how we were going to do it. And the day came when we had to open the doors and actually have the meal. And at that point, one of the people who was really involved in the planning and execution of that community meal said, um, this is great, and that we're doing this. And we have to be very mindful of the fact that we don't say anything that basically shares our faith or is a statement of our faith. So I don't think we should have a prayer. And I stood there and I thought to myself, okay, how am I going to respond to this? And I said, look, we are in a church, aren't we? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, if we can't pray in church, then I don't know where we can pray. And so I think we should pray. And so they said, well, why don't we just pray in the kitchen? I said, okay, I'll pray in the kitchen. And then if you're embarrassed, you stay in the kitchen, and I'll go out and do the bold thing and pray out, in the hall. And I did that, 2 prayers. And that day there was a young man, and from his appearance, it looked like he was a construction worker. And he came there and he had the meal. And after the meal, we had a group discussion. We used to sit and talk about a book. And I invited him for that. And he came to that, and we were all excited because he was a young man. And in churches, when we see young people, we all go crazy. And so he came over, he sat there, and he listened to our book discussion. And after a while, he said, isn't it somewhere in your scripture that you should never keep the lamp under, or hide the lamp under a bushel? And that day opened us all to accepting that we are being asked to go, and not just go, but go with purpose. Not anywhere far away, but right here in our community. All right. So that was my second story. My third story about going is that when COVID happened, and we were all pushed into this time of, okay, how are we going to connect now? How are we going to be church now? So immediately we went and got Zoom connections, and we started this Zoom worship services. And then after a while we got other technology to do things, perhaps even in a better way. While we were doing this, my prime question was, what is church? Because if I don't know what church is, then I cannot translate it into the digital space. I need to first know what is church to be able to translate it into the digital space. And I looked around, and I thought to myself, no, the church cannot be about one or two or three or even four people, a priest and a layperson and a musician or whatever, three, four people just doing something for others to see. I thought to myself, that is not really church. Church is more than that. But I can understand why, that's where we are having to start, because most of us are trying to figure out technology. But what is church? And I came to the point where uh, church for me is people gathered. And the technology was not letting us do that. So in my exploration, I went every possible forum that I could go to figure out how do we become a church which is about a gathered community. And um, I found some people who were willing to work with me to develop an app that would actually bring people together and replicate what we have known church to be, which is a gathering of the faithful and worshiping together, being together, sharing our stories together, and really being a source of encouragement and support to each other, and so on and so forth. So that's my third story of going. Now these are three different stories. In each story, it's a completely different mission engagement, a completely different setting of going where God sent either some other people or some other people along with me. And in one case, I found myself going and trying to figure out what is church in this new context. And yet, I feel that in each of those stories, there is at least one thing that is in common, which is my understanding of what informs my going. And that's my question for today. I would like for us to talk about what has informed your going and how does it manifest itself in your going. For me, it has been go therefore, make disciples of all nations. That first story was doing that. The second story, community meal, did that. And the third story, uh, this whole COVID thing has opened for us and removed all barriers for engagement with people who are, regardless of location. For instance, and what we have been able to do here is bring people in from different parts of the United States and even beyond, have people singing together, making really good music together, and so on and so forth. So all those barriers got removed when we decided to really go into this digital space. And so what has informed your going, and how does it manifest itself in your going? Wherever you may be going, whatever your mission location may be. And then the second question is, how do you take your experiences of going from one setting and apply it to another? What is common and what changes between the various mission engagements? So there are certain things that are common. So in my case, it's that Great Commission. For you, it may be something different. So what is it that informs it, and how do you take all those experiences of going from one setting and then apply it to another? What is common between that, and what changes between the various mission engagements? So these two questions, I'm going to put them in the chat section, and I'm going to invite us to engage with them and spend about 10 minutes on our tables talking about those. So let's take a break from the session. Welcome back. I'm most hopeful you had some really wonderful and engaging conversations at your tables. Without losing any more time, I'm going to hand it over to Martha. Thank you so much, Martha, for leading us today.
Well, thank you, Amjad. It's wonderful to be here. So hello, all. And it's also, as Amjad and I were just chatting, my hometown is in Connecticut, in Fairfield. And so it's kind of wonderful to be here back in the Episcopal Church in Connecticut virtually. And just before I start, let me just say a little bit more. As you see from my title, I currently serve as the missioner for networking and formation in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. And as you'll hear from my stories, I have lived elsewhere. But I think one reason that I was reached out to is right now I'm this triennium during these 3 years, I am chairing the Standing Commission for World Mission for these 3 years for the larger church. And I'm really excited about our work as we're trying to engage and give people guidance, or not guidance, but develop guiding principles about what does it mean to live in terms of world mission? What does that mean for us? So anyway, that was just a little more introduction of myself. So I'm going to do also a little reading, so I apologize. But one of the things I want to do when talking about Go is I really went back to kind of two sources, which I also commend to you. One is The Way of Love, which I'm hoping many of you are familiar with, on the Episcopal Church website. And so I'll be quoting some things from there because their whole resource on Go, along with the other practices that we've been going through, are really wonderful. They have curriculums and videos and all that, but what they say about Go, I think, is right on target. And also is the questing resource. So this whole series was based on the questing resource done by Grace and Titus that Amjad said earlier. And I think, again, I commend that to you if you haven't had a chance to see it. It's easily downloadable on Amazon, and it's, again, a wonderful gift to the church. So Go, if you look at The Way of Love on the website of the Episcopal Church, the first thing that comes up, it says Go, cross boundaries, listen deeply, and live like Jesus. Cross boundaries, listen deeply, and live like Jesus. So The Way of Love challenges us to go. We are reminded that Jesus did not stay in one place and that he went out of his town. He was on the road. He was in the desert. He was engaging with people of all kinds. And one of the things I love the most of what they said is that he listened to their stories and he dignified their stories. And we'll come back to that. I love that term. No matter what their station is in life, and I don't have to go over, the tax collector or the widow or whoever it is, that he dignified who they are, whatever culture, wherever they were from. So as it says, the pursuit of Jesus is often moving out of our own circles of comfort and going to other places geographically, culturally, economically, linguistically, spiritually. As we hear in the Gospel of John, as the Father has sent Jesus, I send you. So let me tell you a few stories of my Go. And I might add here, and you'll see when we talk later on, is that I have not traveled on pilgrimages and all kinds of places as much as I would have liked to. Life has not afforded me that opportunity. I was this year supposed to go in March to Tanzania with a small group from here to meet and study with the School of Theology over in Tanzania to talk about how do we both define mission? How do the folks in Tanzania, how do the folks in the United States talk about mission and global mission, and what does that look like, and was really excited about that because it's only going to expand our definition of what mission is about. Then in May, I was going to go on an Episcopal Relief and Development pilgrimage to Cuba and do the same thing in terms of just travel from site to site and see how Episcopal Relief and Development does its work, meet with the folks. So those were going to be kind of two of my opportunities, which I hope to do in the future. But I will tell you about some travel I've done. So before I moved to the Diocese of Massachusetts 2 years ago, I was an active lay member in the Diocese of Newark. And one of my roles there years ago was as co-chair of the Companion Diocese Committee. So we went through a whole discernment process of figuring out who do we want a companion with. We had one companionship with a diocese over in Malawi, and that was good, but people just didn't have a chance to travel over there, and they felt that was an important part of this companionship. So we kind of went through a variety of factors in terms of all our little checklist, and we thought the Diocese of Panama. The Diocese of Panama did not really have relationships with a lot of other dioceses in our church, and so a few of us went down there to begin this exploration, and it was life-giving. I remember a couple of us stayed, we all stayed with families, and so another member of the committee and I stayed in one with a priest and his wife. We were divided, going to visit different sites. We met the bishop. I remember very clearly being in the back of a pickup truck as we moved with a woman priest, for hours, going down these roads and stopping in villages and homes, and just the look of joy when they would see her coming down the dirt road, and then they realized that she had us with them, and the hospitality. So we really got a sense. We visited their schools, we visited group homes they had, as I said, met with the bishop, came back here, discerned, really excited about the possibility, brought it to our diocesan convention, and they're like, yes, this is great. So I can remember so clearly, contacting the Diocese of Panama and says, great, we've chosen you. You're going to be our companion. And they said, well, we're grateful for this, but now we're going to discern for a year about whether we want to be in companionship with you. And I just remember that was one of my first lessons, like, what? And, but it is about the mutuality. A delegation came up to the Diocese of Newark, met with us, stayed in families, met with our bishop. I remember so clearly showing them one of our diocesan schools, and saying, look at this school, isn't it great? And they were so kind, but they just said kind of like, wait till you kind of spend more time in our schools. Where everybody is fluent in at least 2 languages, et cetera. Long story short, after a year of discernment, their convention agreed that we would be in companionship. And really for the next few years, we had this back and forth. We did not start any projects. We were not sending money. We basically were in relationship and mutuality. So our women's groups of the 2 dioceses would spend time together talking. Unfortunately, Zoom was really not active back then, but talking and conversing back and forth about how they were doing women's ministry. We did have youth from our diocese go down to their camp, and youth from the Diocese of Panama came to our camp. We had some clergy pulpit exchange, but really that whole first few years was really about relationship building and mutuality before we then discerned what kind of work do we want to do together. So that was my first go in terms of personal and the whole humbling experience, shall I say, but we chose you. The second one, a second go story, is actually a little bit closer to home, but again, eye-opening. So I had the great honor, I served on our church's executive council, which is kind of the governing body of the Episcopal Church, for 6 years. And during those 6 years, I actually represented our church to the Anglican Church of Canada. So I had the good fortune of going up to, people would not necessarily think this was good fortune, but I would go to their governing body meetings 3 times a year, and I would go to what they call General Synod, which is like our general convention every 3 years. And I loved it. I loved the people. I loved being with them and learning about how they do church, even though they're just above the border of the United States. Canadians are different. The way they do church is different. And I learned so much about that. And one of the experiences I remember the most is it was the General Synod in Halifax, and that was in 2010. And they basically had passed an action where they have great respect for what they call the First Nation, our indigenous peoples. It's a huge part of who they are as church, and they give a lot of honor and respect to that. And they had passed a resolution to basically make I want to make sure I got the quote, kind of a self-determining national indigenous ministry. So they actually named an Anglican bishop just for that ministry, so it was across Canada, but it was for that indigenous ministry. And this had been a long time coming, and there was great joy and celebration in the Synod Hall when it happened. And after our session ended, I was invited to join the group after the session, and I was excited. I was looking forward to food and dancing and party. Instead, I walked into what they call a sacred circle, which you may be familiar with, where we all sat, and of course I was in the back, and an elder spoke, and the elder spoke, and the elder spoke, and no one interrupted. And I thought, okay, now it's past dinner time. I'm trying not to look at my watch. I'm trying not to look around at people. I'm hungry, but the respect and the listening. The elder probably spoke for 45 minutes, and it was not about, it was about kind of, this is an exciting time, but now we have huge responsibility now to move on with this. Where are we going with this? More elders spoke. And again, it was a matter of, the whole cultural listening to who speaks first, not interrupting, no one getting fidgety. Hours are going on, and then that whole kind of respect. So being part of that sacred circle and listening to that, learning so much about myself and my impatience and my wanting to get on with it, but listening to their words of wisdom was, again, such a gift. Eventually, we did stop, and food and all that was shared. But again, another wonderful experience just above the border. The one other story I want to tell about, and it's actually quite poignant in a way, is that years ago, I did my graduate work in international relations. And one of my favorite classes was this course, and I can't remember the exact name, but it was something like the psychology of the Middle Eastern mind. And it was taught out of the psychology department. And basically what this professor was doing, we were reading children's stories, we were reading fables, we were reading myths, we were reading fiction from different countries in the Middle East. And I know it's obvious to me now, but back then when I was in my early 20s, it was not obvious to me to say the whole perspective on the worldview was different. It was like one of these aha moments, because I just, again, as a, quite frankly, insulated, middle class woman from Connecticut, I just thought that this was the worldview, and understanding how all this, how the different cultures, just reading the children's stories, just reading the fables. At the same time that we're meeting, I was in Chicago. He was going back and forth to Washington, D.C. to consult with the government because there was a situation going on, and he was trying to say, this is how and who you need to deal with. And the government was dealing more with the government. He was saying you need to deal with the religious leaders. He got it. But we were still going down this path. And I say it's poignant because I haven't thought about Marvin Zonas for a long time, and I was looking him up for this presentation, and he just died on Sunday. I mean, who would have ever thought, with the timing of this? I mean, just amazing. But he really impacted me. It relates to what you'll read about also in the Questing resource, which is David, make sure I have this, David Livermore, who's written a lot about cultural intelligence. And how do you move from an interest in a culture to really acceptance and awareness to the point of actually intentional interaction? And that's what I thought that Professor Zonas was trying to teach us, and all that it's not just, it's you've got to really delve yourself into it. And that's what Go is about. So I just want to remind folks, we don't have to be in Panama, we don't have to be in Canada, but wherever we are, we have the opportunity to go. We all, as I said, many of us have not had the opportunity to travel outside of this country, but there are people all over the world in our communities, most likely. They may be in our churches. Our children might be in the same classrooms as other children. They may be in our shops. They may be in our park. The question is, do we get out of our comfort zone and go? Do we go and introduce ourselves to whoever the quote other is, and I don't like that word, and introduce ourselves, listen, and dignify their story? And I just still love that whole thing from dignifying. Perhaps there's no greater gift than dignifying someone else's story. someone's life by just listening, by just meeting them and just listening, not trying to fix them, not trying to whatever, but just go and be in the presence of them. And I think that's what Jesus was all about. We may have to leave our comfort zone. We might have to leave comfort with language, all kinds of things. But remember, cross boundaries, listen deeply, and live like Jesus. So the questions that I think will be put in your chat box are, think of an experience when you moved out of your comfort zone to meet someone, listen to their story, and dignify them simply by your presence. How did it make you feel? And again, to remind you, this is anywhere. It doesn't have to be across the globe. It could be in your local community. On the other side, think of a time when someone moved out of their comfort zone to meet you, to listen to your story, and to dignify you with their presence. And how did it make you feel? And one other, if you have a chance, that might be a little bit more academic, is that whole concept of cultural intelligence that, again, I commend to you in the Questing resource and also David Livergood's book. But what are some ways that you and your congregation can move almost on a continuum to become interested in, to become more aware and accepting of, and actually then develop kind of an intentional plan of really interacting with another culture? What does that look like? What does that mean for you to have to do? So those are the questions for the chat, and I'll leave it at that. And I look forward to conversation afterwards.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You have given us a lot to think about. So we have 10 minutes at our tables, and after that we will come together, which would be 7:38. And from 7:38 onwards, we will all be one and reflect on what we heard today, but also what happened previously in the last 5 sessions as well. So we're going to take a break from the live session. All right. Let's see, it's connecting. All right. So I want to welcome you all back here. So this is the time when we can all share our stories, our conversations that happened at the tables, and our impressions of what we are getting out of this global mission engagement. We have had some absolutely wonderful sessions, and each of them have had their own flavor. All 6 of them were truly enriching. At least I can say that for me. I learned a lot. So we would like to hear from you. How has it been for you? What are you gaining from it? And is there anything that's transformational for you in through these few sessions? So if you raise your hand, I can bring you over. And you'll be here on the stage. And
can I just add one piece to that, Amjad? Do you mind? Is that we talk about this, and as I said, in terms of my role with the Standing Commission and World Mission, I love this work and I love what it's about. And how do we spread the word? How do we get folks to understand, as important as their work in their local community is, and it's not an either or, but how do we make that connection in terms of, our brothers and sisters, whether they're across the town or across the world, but that who we are is so important. I love the fact that Bill started us in terms of the mission of the church. So I would just also love to get what people's thoughts are about how we can do that.
So if you click the raise hand button, I can bring you over, and would love to hear from you.
Plus, I want to see how all this works. So there's a raised hand.
Yeah. All right. So Ed, I think.
Yeah, Ed Post.
So we're just waiting for Ed to connect. All right. So if you raise your hand, I can start this process so there isn't a wait there. All right. So we have Nancy here.
Hi.
Hi. How are you, Nancy?
Hi. How are you, Martha? I'm Amjad. Hi. It's always a pleasure to hear you. One of the things that I've learned over these past weeks is what a great resource for change here in our parishes. The mission, the people who have been on mission are. One of the things that has come so clearly is that they cherish the difference between the Anglican worship they've seen elsewhere and the Anglican worship or the Episcopal worship in their home parishes. And I had never really understood that the people who are home from mission can be allies, opening up our little parochial, geographically isolated rural Connecticut parishes. And it's the people who've been on mission that can really be supportive to doing things like finding out who the Native Americans in the community are and inviting them to teach us some aspect of their culture, for instance. Or looking for a cluster. There are a lot of Ecuadorians who live in Danbury. Going to the Ecuadorian Community Center and asking if they'd host a coffee and joining with them in bringing our dessert to their dessert in their space rather than our space. And, you know, I'm full of these ideas. People sometimes wish that I would just shut up and take my gifts elsewhere, but that is not to be. So now I'm going to be looking for the mission people, and I'm going to ask them for their help and their enthusiasm in building these ideas.
I love that. And Nancy, I love that in terms of going. I love the fact of going over. You said Ecuadorian, like we're just going to go over and have dessert and coffee, and just to kind of say, we're coming to you. That's the other thing. We're coming to you. We just want to get to know each other. A lot of times we say, well, why aren't they coming to us? No, we just want to be in relationship, and we'll bring the coffee and dessert, and let's just like break bread together. Let's just break cake together, whatever it is. I think that's really important. And the other thing I want to say, I don't know if you were when you're talking about people who perhaps do mission. The other thing is when people go to other places around the world, ask them to buy or be gifted, not steal, the books of common prayer that are in other places. We talk about, a lot of us use a New Zealand prayer book, but I know when I was in South Africa, you know, the Book of South Africa or the Anglican Church of Canada's book, there's just enough difference that you just get the language is so beautiful. So I just want to add that little piece to it too.
Well,
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Also, Nancy, I would also say, you know, oftentimes we forget that, and I think the corporate world is recognizing this more and more, that within our US culture, there are many cultures. And it's not just because of, immigration. It's also because at times different generations and corporations are discovering that different generations have different work ethics, different way they view their life, and so on and so forth. And I often wonder how how much do we really consider that in churches, and if that has something to do with our ability to connect with people or not connect with people, right? Uh, are we really in our culture of church connecting with just one kind of generation, one culture, or are we really willing to make that, as Martha talked about, that cultural intelligence, making that uh, uh, connection and really delve deep into understanding the other culture? Are we really willing to do that? And within our communities, within our churches, within our households, within our towns, are we willing to do that? Because that right there is a great opportunity to go. You know, Uh, why not? Why not think of all these different situations? Um, all right, Nancy, I think I'm trying to bring you back. All right.
Oh, good. I just wanted to follow up. Thank you both so much. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the resource material that our ECCT committee on racial healing has prepared. But one of the things that Martha got me thinking about with the prayer books, every parish does a Bible study or a prayer group. And what if we did lesson plans? Or when I say we, what if I or someone like me did lesson plans, bringing together prayer books from other cultures with our own book of common prayer, and made that just a little mini, maybe 3-night prayer discussion? And if we develop just a whole series of these little tiny activities that require no money and are well within our comfort zone already, and just plant it as a seed, perhaps that's something we could do next, or I could do next, and ask you to look at and to add to.
I love that. I love that because you'll weave both the similarities and the differences.
Exactly.
How the prayers are phrased. You're like, oh my God, that is so beautiful. I mean, as I said, a lot of us use the New Zealand prayer book because of certain ways things that are said.
And that's where, when I
Oops,
oh
you lost you again. All right.
Sorry, Nancy. I'll follow up with Nancy.
Yeah. We'll get you back here. Molly, you are here. All right.
Oh, hi everyone. I guess when I've been listening the past few weeks, and what I hear is a common theme in the stories that I'm hearing is that when we open ourselves up to really listening to someone in a new culture, we hear God in a new way. So it broadens. I think it expands us, and that's what I hear, that similarity in stories Amjad told tonight, and what Martha told, and then throughout the weeks. So that's kind of my takeaway message.
Awesome.
Thank you, Molly. And as I said, when I was reading the questing materials and the way of love, the thing about dignify, that just really spoke to me. Like, what does it mean to dignify somebody? You can listen to somebody, which is first for me,
that's a
to be able to
beautiful word,
listen. Yeah. But the whole idea of like dignifying their story means that you really just hear it and respect and listen and all those things. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So We are at 7:56. I'm also mindful of our time. Our promise is to stop at 8 o'clock. Next week, it is our last session. And we have a really interesting uh, two speakers, and they are also just like when we did Pam and Reverend Ben and Father Tom. The central theme ended up being Africa, and next week it's going to be Middle East, and it's going to be really interesting because we have someone who is really doing a lot of good work through Jerusalem Peace Builders in and through Israel, but going into Middle East. And then we have a different perspective coming from Oman. And so it's going to be very interesting next week. And all that within the context of the spiritual practice of rest. And so that's going to be interesting too. How do you think of rest in the Middle East, right? So it's I'm really looking forward to our speakers next week. Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you truly, Martha, for being here tonight and really sharing your stories and really encouraging us to think deeper about our interactions, our cultural intelligence, and our giving respect and dignity to the people we interact with, and dignifying the cultures we interact with.
Well, thank you, Archbishop. Really nice.
All right. Well, good night, and God be with you. And we hope to see you next week. And a very happy Thanksgiving to all of you. All right. Bye-bye.
That's right, Amjad.